the great thing about this is that if I'm on the air on my show, I can't just say to the expert, can you tell me what happened to me when I got ill with COVID? So we're going offline a bit here with the great Chris Smith. How do you like to be described, Chris? I want to get it right.
Well, I'm Chris Smith. I'm a consultant virologist at the University of Cambridge, and I'm also the Naked Scientist. It's a science radio program and podcast that I set up. Actually, it's 20 years old this year, the initiative, but we make science, medicine, technology radio programs that go all over the world.
And virologists, as we've said a number of times, are now sexy. I mean, they are pretty much the most interesting people on the planet. So it's great to have you with us. We've got about 25 minutes.
At the moment.
Yeah, for now. So look, I felt, let me just say what happened. I got it over Christmas. I was ill on Christmas Day. So that you can imagine, I was really pissed off about that. And by the way, isn't it great we can say that word because we're not broadcasting? And my question is, I'm going to ask you how I got it. Okay. So I was ill on Tuesday night, feeling ill, high temperature, etc. We'll go through that in a minute. And I'm going to give you 3 scenarios, right? Number 1, Waitrose on the Saturday. So bear in mind, I felt ill on the Tuesday. Number 2 is I always cycle everywhere, but for 2 days, I took mini cabs into work because I needed to carry stuff. And number 3 is while at one of my workplaces, I won't say which one, I saw an old friend and we hadn't seen each other for so long. And we chatted for 15 minutes and we were, I think we might have been 2 meters apart, but I'm not sure. And then over Christmas, I heard that her husband had got it and she got it. So what do you think?
I'd say all of the above. It's impossible to say because we know that coronavirus can cause symptoms. It can cause no symptoms. And so you can bump into somebody and they look right as rain and they're actually infected with and infectious with coronavirus infection. There might also be people who are like you, who got symptoms, but they hadn't got them yet because a lot of people who get coronavirus, actually they're most infectious before they get the symptoms. It's a day or 2 pre-symptoms when they're most infectious. And that's the real headache with this thing because it makes controlling it incredibly difficult. And then you point out that you spent a lot of time in cars, and cars almost certainly are a major factor in this because the sharing of air that goes on between the occupants is really high, especially in the middle of winter because it's so cold. You're not going to be changing the air. You're not going to drive everywhere with the window open. And even if you do, there's still that proximity. There's still the fact that there will be virus bobbing around in the air in the car. And then there's your friend who you spent time talking to indoors, presumably. Yeah. And the problem with indoors is the air is not changed. So all of those are possibilities. And it's very, very difficult to work out which one. You'd have to look at the timings, most importantly, because the median incubation is about 5 days. So I would be thinking, got it on Tuesday or symptomatic on Tuesday, I'm probably going to have been exposed about 5 days before that, and that's your best chance of hitting whoever gave it to you, the target. But, you know, it could be any of those eventualities.
I tell you why I came down to thinking it was the friend. And part of it is just me listening to you over months and months and months. I ruled out the cab because I felt the way I would have caught it in the cab would be putting my hand on the back seat and touching where another person had touched it. But that's called a fomite, as I understand, and that's not a very common way of getting it. And I ruled out Waitrose because I never had that lengthy contact with any individual. So I ended up with a friend. And the reason the friend is, to me, the way to go is because the sequence is her husband gets it, she gets it, I get it. So I think it's got to be the friend. But that means it's really infectious because we were 1.5 meters apart. And, I mean, I'm surprised it made that jump. That's a pretty big jump for a microbe.
Well, it's a tiny microbe. Each virus is about 1/10,000th of a millimeter across. And if you think of it in terms of smoke, I mean, we don't want to encourage people to smoke, but we're all familiar with if you're near someone who's smoking and you watch where the smoke goes. Well, some of those particles of smoke are much bigger than particles of virus. And you can use the smoke, therefore, as a proxy marker of where the air currents are going. And if you can smell the smoke from someone's lit cigarette on the other side of the room, you're effectively breathing in molecules that were in their lungs a few seconds before.
Okay, so I'm going to pull down a question from up here and just place it there. And this question is why I didn't suffer. Tuesday night, ill on Wednesday, sweating, cough for a day, high temperature, Christmas Day, as I say, right off. By the Saturday, I was walking and talking. Now, why? Is it because I cycle? What is it?
That almost certainly helps, because if you look at what the risk factors are, the people who are getting really, really ill, apart from the fact you can't help the fact that you are male, which is a major risk factor, about 3/4 of the seriously ill cases are men. It's older people and people with obesity and diabetes. They're the really, really high risk ones. And we don't really know why, to be quite honest with you. We've recently been doing some studies in Cambridge at the university where we've actually been looking at people who range from very mild illness to very severe illness. And you can see a fingerprint in the immune system of changes right from the get-go, before people are even very ill, which is going to indicate whether a person's going to be really ill weeks later or not. And the thing that's changing here seems to be people whose immune systems don't succeed early in controlling the virus do really badly. People who've got a really good immune response that very quickly gets on top of the infection and wrestles it to the ground, they do really well. And so the fact you had those very intense symptoms early on with the sweating, the fever, the headache, you're also a younger person, those would have all helped.
Okay. When I was in bed with it, I became really worried I was going to lose my taste and smell, because I think that seems to be a year-long problem, right? As it happens, Chris, my editor had given me for Christmas a large bar of very smelly soap. So what I did was I had it by the bed and I sniffed it, and it had a particularly pungent smell. And there were two thoughts here. Firstly, I was checking, obviously, that I could still smell, and I could. And then afterwards, because I got no disruption, I thought, do you know what? The bar of soap is what kept my airway open. Now, that is the original old wives' tale, I know, but give us your thoughts on that.
I don't think it did, but it might have helped it to recover more promptly back to its full acuity. And the reason I say this is the reason that people lose their sense of smell and taste about 60% of the time with acute coronavirus infection is that the cells that see the virus first are cells in the nose. At the top of the nose is something called the olfactory epithelium. It's a sheet of tissue that's decorated with these fine sprays of nerve endings. And on those nerve endings are chemical docking stations for all the different smells that you can smell. And when you smell something, basically the constellation of molecules going up your nose engages with different nerve endings. And it's the spectrum of nerve endings that get recruited that corresponds to the smell that's sent onto your brain. It just so happens that those same cells also make on their surfaces very large amounts of this ACE2 molecule, which is the very thing the virus is looking for and uses as a toehold to get into our cells. So in people who make a lot of that molecule, and some people make more than others, as well as another molecule that does the equivalent of pulling the pin out of the hand grenade on the virus that also comes from your tissue, that helps the virus in. If it grows in those cells to a high level, it will kill them. And those cells can be regenerated, they do come back, but the acute loss of them is what causes, in about 2/3 of people, the abrupt loss of sense of smell and taste. Because what we call taste is actually mostly smell, because it's odors from your mouth going up the back of your nose, and then you actually experience them as, although it's a smell, it's actually being experienced as taste. Once those cells recover, you get back your sense of smell and taste. But not everybody does. Most people within 2 weeks, they're back to normal, but a healthy proportion of unhealthy people don't get it back. Some people never, some people slowly, and those are the people you're saying, months onwards, and some people get an even weirder sensation called parosmia. And this is where things that they previously used to love smelling, when they smell them now, they taste absolutely disgusting. And people will say the smell of cooked or stewed meat, cheese, it begins to smell almost like puke and things like that. And people will have to leave a room because things they used to love, like pizza, they'll say, I used to love this. Under those circumstances, they can retrain their sense of smell by using really strong, defined odors and experiencing them, smelling them. And in this way, it helps, we think, as the nerve system regenerates and starts to reestablish connections with the right bits of the brain to send those messages through, it does help to reestablish some semblance of normal smell and taste. But in some people, the recovery can be very protracted, and in some cases doesn't seem to happen at all. So it's very worrying.
So we're a month on from when I was infected. I do have one remaining sort of symptom thing. I've got a loss of appetite. And I do have a strange taste in my mouth, but not a smell problem. And because there's so much of this is psychological, I can't tell whether that's just me inventing it, that's that whole reverse placebo thing. And I suppose I'm thinking, at what point if you've had it and you think you've got over it, do you know you're safe from long COVID, which scares the bejesus out of us?
Okay, well, first of all, the funny taste in your mouth, you could have a bit of what we're calling parosmia. Because if you've lost some connections in your olfactory pathway, which is the smell circuit in your brain, you could be misinterpreting some smells which are normal to you and calling them a funny taste. So it's possible. Not exclusively, it's possible. You could also just have something totally different going on. And if you've had a respiratory infection with a virus, it could be that you've now got a bit of overgrowth of other bacteria, because sometimes you get a bacterial infection off the back of a viral infection, and it takes a while for everything to settle down in the aftermath. So all those things could contribute. We also know people are presenting with gastrointestinal symptoms with acute coronavirus. And in fact, the Chinese are now actually doing tests using rectal swabs to look for the virus, because it doesn't just grow in your respiratory tract. The virus can also linger in your intestines, and it goes off to the sewage works as well with what you put down the toilet. So it is possible in some people, they hang on to the virus for a long period of time in the intestinal system. And in fact, people are publishing papers where they've gone into people who've recovered from the infection, they're back to normal. And if you take samples from the wall of the small intestine and put it under a very powerful microscope, you can actually see virus particles in there months later. Now, these people might be the exception, but at the same time, it does give us cause for thought. Maybe the virus does cling on in some remote parts of the body where it can still gain a toehold for a period of time. Perhaps that leads to persistent changes in the immune response, and perhaps that's part of what's going on with long COVID. Most people, though, who are going to get long COVID, that they know about it within, a couple of weeks to a month or so. The fact that you've made an uneventful recovery, you're in the majority, because most people will, and I think it's unlikely at this stage that you're going to slide back into that situation. But the thing we're learning about this virus, doctors are saying it's the weirdest thing they've ever treated.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because we all spend time thinking we're too heavy. Everyone does. I'm 12.5 stone and I'm 6'3", so my BMI is fine. But post-COVID, with just a lack of interest in food, I'm now 11.5 stone. So, that's quite a drop, really. I'm eating and everything, I'm fine, but I can't work out whether it's COVID or not. The main thing is, if it's going to take a while to get better, that's fine. If it's going to get worse, then I need to be a little bit, as they say on the police cordons, police aware.
I don't think you're going to get worse. I think you will get better, because the data we're seeing is even people with long COVID changes, you can see changes in people's immune systems that persist well after they clear the infection. It's almost like the immune slate has been wiped clean. COVID punches holes in people's immune response, and it probably leaves them susceptible to a range of other things that they previously wouldn't have batted an eyelid at.
Let me just do some quick Q&A with you, okay? I've written a few down here. Am I immune now?
Yeah, someone who's recovered from coronavirus has made antibodies and white blood cells to get rid of the infection. The thing you have to bear in mind is, though, we don't know how long for, because there have been a number of studies now that have looked at people with natural infection, and some of them still get it again despite natural infection. Also, people who have had natural infection and have got antibody lose those antibodies. Slowly, with time, your immune response does disappear. Now, whether that means it disappears completely or whether it just lurks in the background with some immune memory against the virus that could nevertheless come back to protect you later, that we don't know. I'd say you're absolutely, like Boris Johnson said, bursting with antibodies.
Obviously, I won't be offered a vaccine for some time, as I'm 55. But if I was to be offered one, would it be mad to say, no, thanks, I'm immune?
Actually, it would be better to have the vaccine, because what we know is that the more challenges your immune system gets, the better it becomes, and the longer lived and more robust your response is.
If I had some ongoing symptoms, and I've described what are really relatively mild, am I still infectious?
Probably not. And notwithstanding what I said about the fact that we might, if we look really, really hard, find traces of virus in some people for some periods of time, the amount of virus that's leaving the body in someone who's broadly recovered is so low, it doesn't constitute an infectious dose.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one more, which involves this will test you, okay? So I just pull down, if I can, the PCR test I had, right? Now, bizarrely, let's just put it there. Okay, what happened was really weird, okay? I booked a private PCR test for the 23rd of December on the basis that we were going to go down to see elderly relatives in Devon. Of course, all of that was cancelled. I wake up on the 23rd of December, I bloody well got it. So I think, well, there's one stroke of luck here. I've already got a test in my diary. So I go down, I have to sit, my wife drives me, I sit in the back seat, they swab my nose, swab the back of my throat. Very unpleasant, by the way. I mean, golly me, can we not get a better test, a different way of doing it? Anyway, on Christmas Day, they email me the results. And I know I've got it, right? But they email me something I don't understand. Now, let me just enlarge it on the screen if I can. And this is, what does this say? This small print here, these numbers, is it CF, CT? What's that?
Yeah, CT. It means crossing threshold. Now, the way that these PCR tests work is that you take a sample from a person, so your nose and your throat swab, and from that sample is extracted genetic material. And the point at which that probe says, aha, there's enough stuff in here that I can now see it, and it flashes up a light that the machine says it's a positive, that is a threshold set for the test. It's called the CT value, or crossing the threshold, and that's the value reported on your test. And it gives us an indicator of how much virus is there to start with, because if that number's really low, it means the machine didn't have to go through very many copying cycles before there was enough genetic information there that we could detect it. So the fact that you've got a really low, because your one's pretty low, that says that there's quite a bit of virus genetic information in there, and both tests from both sites, you've got one from your nose, one from your throat there, they're both similar numbers, which argues that the test is reliable.
Well, yeah, although it's both on the same swab, so I don't know why they'd be separating them out, but...
Well, they could be two separate targets, actually, because the other thing that we do is we don't just look for one target in the virus. You can actually look for two independent genetic targets, so you can probe for two different sequences. If both go off, you know that it's likely to be a true positive.
So a friend of mine who is he's got a medical background, let's just say, said, you're very infectious, you've got a lot of virus, based on that CT number, which I didn't understand. I then worked back from that as a layman, and I said, okay, that's because I had a lot of exposure, I took on a lot of virus, therefore I was full of it, and therefore I've got it really badly. But that logic apparently is a bit off, is it?
You've got to be careful with this, because a swab is not a standard sample. If I took a milliliter of blood out of you, that's a very standard sample, because it's the same blood all around your body, and it's the same volume of blood as if I did the same test on me. But when I stick a nose and throat swab into someone, then I don't know if I've actually collected the bit that's most infectious in them, if I happen to have swabbed just by chance the bit of snot which has got billions of virus particles in it, and if I'd gone 1 millimeter to the side, I could have missed it. And so it's not a standard sample. It's useful, but it's not objective data, and you can't compare your level of infectivity with, say, mine if I did the same test.
All right, one last question very quickly. Did I get the new variant, the so-called Kent variant? Can I find out?
Well, you live in the capital, don't you? And you also are in the southeast, and you also got infected around the time when we know it was becoming pretty rampant. Around the time you would have got it, 2/3 to 70% of the new diagnoses were the new variant. So it's highly likely it probably was the new form of coronavirus that you were infected with, although there's probably a 1 in 3 chance it wasn't. So I'd say that you've got a reasonable chance of both, actually.
Listen, I mean, it's so good to talk. You're getting away to another appointment, and that has so answered all the questions I had about my own illness. And you haven't had it yet, have you? So
No, I had a jab. I'm actually one dose of the vaccine down, waiting for the next one now. And I have to say, it was incredibly well organised. I was amazed. And it was quite funny because I was standing in the queue, and I didn't realise this, but the vaccinators had spotted me in the queue, and they'd seen me on your programme. And so they were all drawing lots backstage to decide who was going to get to shoot up the dock off the telly. And so the lady who actually said I won the draw, she said, but now my hands are shaking because I'm nervous about having to do the bloke who I watch on the telly. But no, they were terrific, and I didn't get any side effects. I mean, obviously a little bit of an achy arm, but I got no side effects. Although some of my colleagues have said they felt a bit rough for about a day, but then, you know,
I've heard that.
Feeling a bit rough is good because it means your immune system's working. No. Maybe mine isn't. I don't know.
Dr. Chris Smith, thank you very much. It's going to be really helpful. I'm really grateful for your time.
It's a pleasure. Really. All right. Take care.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you. See you soon. Thank
Pleasure.
you.
Bye, Jeremy. See you soon.
Lots of love.